Today I am shopping my bookshelf to get books to reread in 2022. Hello lovely friends, thank you so much for joining me today. We're not in the studio today, we're in our lounge room and more specifically in our little reading corner, which is what this area is. And what I'm going to talk about today are books that I'm going to reread in 2022. So in 2021, I made an effort to read more, and you can see my video about how I fit reading into my day up here. But basically, I read 44 books last year, which is more than I thought I had, and I definitely didn't have a number that I was trying to hit. So this year, I'm going to try and reread some of my old books. As they say, shop my bookshelf. Last year I tended to concentrate a lot on getting books from the library. I was going to reread a lot of books, but I only ended up rereading one. Let me show you which one that is. My favourite book of all time, Infinite Jest by the late great David Foster Wallace. It took me a while to read this one, not just because it's super thick and very, very tiny writing and thin pages, but also it's really chewy book. It's a really difficult to read book. David Foster Wallace is one of those very, very, very clever writers who writes in a very complicated way, almost show-off kind of way, which I actually really like. But you have to read it slowly, and I'm a very fast sort of skim reader. You can't do that with books like this. So it took me a really long time, and I meant to reread these other books that I've got on the list for 2022, but I only got through this one. Anyway, I'll show you the other ones that I intend to read this year. And as a side note, a book that I did reread, the very last book of 2021 in fact, was a book that I last read when I was about 13, which is just after this book came out. Stephen King's It. I haven't read Stephen King since I was a teenager. So yeah, I got this from the library just to see if it was as good as I remembered it when I was 13 or 14. It was actually really good, but it's a genre that I wouldn't really go back to, but it was fun to read last year. Top of my reading list of books to reread in 2022 is my favourite author in the world, Iris Murdoch. I have read all of her books, but this one is Message to the Planet, and that one is, I would say, one of my favourites. So the first book I'm going to reread will be this one. Now, in kind of the theme of Infinite Jest, I am going to read another really complicated, chewy book, and that one for me is Thomas Pynchon, Gravity's Rainbow. It's the first Thomas Pynchon book I ever read, and I read it first in 2005. I would have thought it was only about 10 years ago, but apparently it's more than 15 years ago. So I'm going to reread this one in 2022. The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I last read this one in 2003. The reason I know this is because I have it written in the book. I don't do that anymore. I don't write my name and the date in the book, but this one I did purchase in 2003. It was really, really good back then. I don't know whether I'll still like it, but I'm going to find out this year. Another great classic that I loved to read was Thomas Mann, and this one's The Magic Mountain, which I really enjoyed. When did I last read this? 2003, again. It's been a while, so I'm going to reread this one. Thomas Mann is one of my favourite authors, so I can't wait to read this. I've had this book for many years as well. It's actually a non-fiction occult book. It is the Zelator. I read this quite some time ago, and again, quite a complicated book because it's got quite a lot of occult, ceremonial magic information in there, but I'm going to read this one again in 2022. Another book on my list I don't have a physical copy of. I've got it as an ebook, but I might try and purchase it because both Anita and I love this book. It's Algernon Blackwood, The Man Whom the Trees Loved. I read it already a few times, and I lent it to Anita and she just was obsessed by it as well. So that's on my list to read. If you haven't read Algernon Blackwood before, he's a very interesting author from I think he was writing in the 1920s. He also was interested in the occult, so they all have that kind of magical background. Most of them you can find for free on Kobo books because they're out of copyright, so I highly recommend finding Algernon Blackwood. I'll have all the details for these books in the description box below, by the way. Now they're my only sort of definite must-reads for 2022 because I still want to borrow some books from the library, but I do have one more that if I get time I will try to read, and that is, now it's a bit shiny, David Eggers' A Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius. This is such an amazing book. And 2001. It's good to write down when you buy books, but maybe in future I'll write it in pencil rather than in pen like I have with this one. I came to this book through David Foster Wallace actually, because I'm looking now and David Foster Wallace actually did a review of the book on the back of this one, so that's why I bought the book. It's a much easier read than David Foster Wallace. It's like an autobiography, but it's incredibly entertaining and very, very well written. So that's my list for 2022 so far. Again, I don't have an expectation of how many books that I want to read this year. I'm just going to keep reading and just be drawn to what I'm drawn to. I don't think I'll reread anything from my teenage years again, but the ones that I've got sitting behind me, they literally came out of this bookshelf and I've got it sitting in a certain area, so I will get through those in 2022. So let me know in the comments below if there's any books that you want to reread in 2022. I have seen so many videos lately about buying books, but I just want to remind you, of course, that you can go to your local library. You can borrow audiobooks, e-books and physical books from your local library, and most libraries these days can even get books from other libraries and send them to your local library. So there's no need to buy books if you don't want to. And another way is to do exactly what I'm doing this year, is to shop your bookshelf. Go back into your old books and see if there's any that you want to reread. So when we moved from our old house to this house a few years ago, I actually really downsized all my books. So the only books that I kept are the ones that I want to reread. I got rid of everything else because I used to buy books all the time. And I can't even remember the last time I bought a book at all. So if you're thinking of decluttering your bookshelf, just keep the books that you think you will reread in future, or books that you may lend to other people, but everything else either borrow from the library or donate the ones that you don't think you'll read again. So thank you so much for joining me for this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. It's a little bit different from my usual videos, but until my next video, bye.